I don't see Janet's icon on my screen.
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
Hear me now? Sorry. Oh, the mic is muted. Okay. Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix. I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as Mad Painter. And today we have our very special guest, Russell Brinegar. And I was just working on the show, talked to him. He could have sent us a bunch of stuff we're going to talk about today. But Russell is the author of Overlords and Singularity, the manipulation of Humankind by hidden UFO intelligences and the quest for Transcendence. So we typically talk about artificial intelligence and other things that are extremely interesting. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say before we bring on Russell?
A long time ago, Russell, you had recommended a book. I think it was on all these different notions of God, and you were all hot on it. And at the time, I thought that would be a wonderful thing to discuss.
Right. And whatever else you want to throw at us, Russell, we're ready to talk about some cutting-edge information. So welcome to our show.
Okay, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive. We're in the process of a huge scientific paradigm shift. And every day that I wake up and I realize I'm still in this waking consciousness state, I think I'm very thankful that on August the 18th, 2009, I had a heart attack and almost died, accompanying with a anomalous near-death experience in which I encountered several entities that were familiar to me that made me realize that we do live in a multi-dimensional reality. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have embarked on the research that I've done in the last 11 years. I've got 100 printed books and about 300 audio books in my head to draw information from and connect dots. And I never would have gone that route. I was somebody that maybe read a book once every 5 years. So this experience back in 2009 put me on a whole different path. And I'm really glad that it's happened because I'm not a doctorate of physics or anything like that. But due to the material that I've exposed myself to, I feel like I'm on the precipice of understanding some of the smartest people on the planet, like Dr. Sean Carroll. There's an Italian quantum loop gravity physicist, Dr. Carlo Rovelli, that's saying some amazing things, and Donald Hoffman, who just came out with his conscious agent theory. So we're on the precipice of completely shifting from a Newtonian version of science in which space and time is considered the absolute objective reality to finding out that that isn't true, that we're actually involved in a observer-dependent user interface, and that there's another layer of reality beyond this. And there's a whole process on how they came to these conclusions. Some of it has to do with what's going on at the particle accelerator in CERN. They've gotten down to about as small as they can go, and for them to go down any farther, they would need a hadron collider the diameter of the solar system, and they're not going to be able to do that. And even if they did, they'd be putting enough energy into the system to create black holes, and the more energy they put into it, the bigger the black hole would be. So as Donald Hoffman says, space and time are doomed. It's completely observer dependent. We know this from the double slit experiment in quantum physics, where if you shoot a photon through two slits, it actually goes into a state of superposition, and with the introduction of an observer, the wave becomes a particle. So we know that it's an observer-dependent interface that we're dealing with. And as a result of all this, people are rethinking everything. And one thing that hit me most recently is that our veterans are committing suicide now, one every 65 minutes, and they fall into two categories. One of them are people in my age bracket, 64, 65 and older, that went to Vietnam. And the others are the younger ones that they're sending to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And the reason that this has spiked so much, I believe, is because of the global consciousness awareness that is taking place right now, to where you now realize it's like we've evolved away from war. And we now realize and experience on a very deep level that if you take the life of another human being, you've negated your own, and they're just not able to bear this emotional burden and unfortunately annihilate. So something major is happening in the world in the realm of consciousness and science. So I'm really glad to have opened the portal to be in on that and to be able to read the works of these cutting edge physicists.
Wow, that's okay. What do you want to say, Sasha?
Well, that's Hoffman. We still have Carol and Ravelli.
Well, let's talk about what Hoffman. So this is an observable. It has to have an observer in order for things to happen. You're talking about how the vets are suiciding. I was just thinking the other day about presidents and what's their level of complicity or I don't know what the word I'm trying to say. But anyway, when they become president, they start sending people to war, whether they started it or they just begin participating in it. So they too have blood on their hands. I think the only president that may not have sent people to war was Carter. Is that correct? I'm not sure. But what about that level of participation in murder when you're the head of a country and you're sending people to war?
That's a very good philosophical question as to how much responsibility somebody actually has that orders another person to do bad things. And unfortunately, we had a really good message from Dwight D. Eisenhower back in the 50s when he warned us of the military-industrial complex and this sort of breakaway civilization that was in the formative stages back then. And it has grown into a Frankenstein monster that's out of the lab. And unfortunately, the United States is in the business of war, and we export war, we export weapons. And the current leader, actually overlooked the murder of an American citizen to sell billions of dollars worth of arms to Saudi Arabia and several other rounds after that. So to the extent that somebody is responsible for that is a good question. I don't have the answer to that, but I would say it's actually heavier than the individual soldier that finds himself in a battle zone and his sergeant tells him, we've got to kill every man, woman, and child in this house because there might be somebody in there that we need to get. And when they do that, the emotional and psychological impact of negating their own life in the process is something they have to live with when they come back to the United States. And unfortunately, a lot of them are self-terminating because they just can't bear it another day. So I would, to answer your question, I would say that the responsibility is much greater than the individual soldier that actually commits the act.
I was reading Danny and Brinkley's book years ago, and he had been in an assassin. And when he had his near-death experience, went on the other side because he was hit by lightning, he experienced what happened to the people he killed. And the pain, not only that person felt, but everybody that was related to him, involved with him, his friends, his family. And so it was exponentially, he had killed like hundreds of people. So he had to go through that immense trauma of a life review, not only of his own, but of all the people. It was like those people had possessed him and somehow made amends and got through the process. So imagine if you're like the, general that leads millions of men into war and kills, millions, or a Hitler or something. That's the process you go through when you pass over to the other side. Sasha, any feedback?
Well, I think we all have. That's exactly the point. Everything in the human experience is really there. And if you just let yourself feel it, you've realized you've played all the roles. And so you're free to not be trapped in a role.
Back to you, Russ.
Okay. Well, going back to some of the physicists that are in unison saying that this is that Newtonian physics, as we've known it, has worked really well for a couple of hundred years, but we've been operating under a false assumption that space and time, as our perception tells us that's out there, is objective reality. And what these physicists are saying is that version of objective reality is dead, that there's a whole nother layer outside of space and time that we have very little clue about, and we're just now discovering that it's actually there. Some of the mathematicians and the physicists that deal with this to actually explain this realm it would take hundreds and hundreds of pages of really nasty mathematics, but they're now looking to geometric algebra and in something called the amplitude hedron, where it can be explained on the back of a napkin. So the mathematics gets real simple when you go beyond what we've always thought was objective reality into this other realm. And my most recent pleasant discovery, that there's channeled material from the past, in particular the Seth material from 1971 with Carla Ruckert, and the Ra or the Law of One material channeled by, Jane Roberts did the Seth material in 1971. Carla Ruckert did the Ra material in 1981, 10 years later. And I've listened very carefully to Seth Speaks and Through Personal Reality, which is also another Seth book, and the Law of One material, which is now on Audible, at least the first volume is. And what these entities are saying that are being channeled through these human instruments is an exact match for what the cutting edge theoretical physicists are saying, that when we're living this life, we're actually in superposition with a probability field, that we have an etheric version of ourselves that's outside of space and time, and that this version of ourselves is like the measured value of an electron. When you measure an electron and determine its location, it's also superposition with an electron cloud. And what all the physicists are finding out is that that actually applies to the macro world. The macro world of space and time as we observe it is in sort of a superposition with a higher dimensional realm that they speculate consists of informational structures. That's how Dr. Jacques Vallée described it, is a metaphysical realm of informational structures. But Donald Hoffman is more specific in that it consists of individual units of conscious agents. And we're not only talking about human consciousness, we're talking about all different kinds of various types of consciousness that we can't probably even imagine. And then that brings up the whole subject of transhumanism and the coming technological singularity, which more people are talking about now than they were back in 2016 when I wrote my book, Overlords of the Singularity. The technological singularity is a hot topic right now, and people are speculating about whether robots can become sentient. And there are people on both sides of the fence on this, but Donald Hoffman is one that says yes, that when we put together the right combination of silicon and circuitry, that this is going to open up a portal to this other realm where an infinite number of various types of conscious agents exist, and they'll be able to concretize themselves in this realm, possibly for the first time. Whitley Strieber talks about this in his new book, A New World. He goes into a lot of detail in this book about his 30-year relationship with the other, which in his case is a gray type entity plus what he calls the kobolds. They're sort of like little blue trolls. And his feeling is that one of their purposes is to feed us technology so that, in his perspective, to catch up with these entities that he's interacting with, and so that we can have a useful conversation for the first time in history. So there's a lot of interesting things on the table, a lot of food for thought.
Can it go two ways? If they concretize, can we unconcretize or disintegrate, like they or go into whatever dimension they go into? It should go both ways.
Well, that's a good question, whether some of the technologies, my sense is, just my spidey sense, is that some of the technologies that we'll be inventing soon are actually allowing for a metaphysical interface with higher dimensions. And one of the things that the physicists are saying, which are saying the same thing as Carla Ruckert and Jane Roberts said in the Raw material and the Seth material, is that the veil that we perceive between the land of the living and the land of the so-called dead is an artificial barrier, and that when human consciousness evolves in the future in a post-singularity world, that veil between the living and the non-living will be meaningless, that we'll actually be able to communicate with the other side. so to speak. And
this is amazing because I've just been doing these Mayan studies, and the Maya thought there was the world of the dead came out and when it was dark and slid out to this world, and then it slid back when the sun came. The same model.
Right. And then in the new Star Trek Picard, his apparently there's a daughter, and his son, sure who's the daughter, is Data, the creator. Anyway, there's the twin daughters. One gets destroyed in the first episode. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert. But she is an android. Now, Data kind of looked kind of artificial, right? Because he had pasty skin color. But she's so human at this point in the story, she doesn't even know that she's an android. And so I think that human beings very well could be these humanoid androids that are flesh and blood and bleed. And
or avatars of some game players.
Some game player. Yeah, and we're just composed of everything that's in us has lived before. So it's like the ultimate recycling machine. Our blood and our skin and our hairs, it's all just matter that gets recycled, like in Star Trek when you go into the replicator. We're just composed of everything that there's a whole website about, that mountain is actually a living being, and it died and it solidified and became a mountain. If you look from the side, it's got a nose and a chin and everything. So that's first theory is that everything was living, and so we might be living in the belly of a giant creature that laid down to die that was 100 feet tall, and here we are on his mountain or his farm, and it just goes on, and within us we have all these beings, all these parasites and everything imaginable living within us. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. So it's not to say that everything isn't sentient. The hills are alive, or they're dead. What is dead, right?
Well, one of the authors that I've recently discovered is a gifted child named Alex Vykolov, and he's now a philosopher and a cognitive philosopher, and he's written 2 books, The Scintillect Hypothesis and Digital Theology. And I asked him, because I had all this Law of One raw material in there where all the planes are like spheres on top of one another. And I sent Alex a private message on Facebook and asked him how he thought the planes were constructed. And he sent one word back called matryoshka. And it's a Russian word for the Russian dolls, where there's a sphere within a sphere within a sphere, going down infinitely and going up into infinitely. And this is where the 1970 Seth material by Jane Roberts comes in. Seth speaks of atomic pulsations, that atoms and molecules continually pulsate in and out of the probability field. And within this interval, and this is where some of the testimonies of the secret space program experiencers and all that may come into play, in these intervals that last every few nanoseconds, where we're going in and out of the probability field, lies eternity. In other words, you could be drawn into one of these nanosecond long pulsations and out of time and space and go on a 20 or 40 or 60 year or a million year adventure and be put right back into this space-time matrix, and none of your family members would even know you were gone. And I think this is sort of how, and one of the things that this entity, Seth, said was, you are as dead right now as you'll ever be. And that kind of hit me really hard. And what I've been trying to do lately is keep track of my dreams and have an interactive conversation with my dream self. I've just now been able to, I've never seen my body in my dreams. I'm just a disembodied entity that's observing other people. So I did a dream incubation exercise to where I wanted to see my body. And the first dream I had where a body was involved, I saw an old bald guy hopping on one leg to the bathtub, but I was still outside the body. It was me, but I was outside of me looking at me, which I thought was really funny when I woke up. So the next night I said, no, I want to see my body. I want to be inside my body, but I want to be able to see. So I finally, after 3 attempts, I was in a dream and I held up my hand, and all of my fingers were at 45-degree angles and all bloody, like they were broken. And I put my hand down. I said, no, that's not good enough. And when I raised it back up, then I had webbed fingers. And I said, no, I want the real thing. And so I put my hand down. When I pulled it back up, I not only saw a real hand that I flexed, but I saw that I was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. And I actually looked at my body, my arms and my legs for the very first time. And then I suddenly became lucid, where I knew I was asleep dreaming this dream. And that was where it really got cool. I was in my body, I was inside my dreamscape, and I was conscious that I was asleep dreaming and experiencing this dream. That was really cool. So I decided to do it with my dogs, because I was disturbed that my dogs never showed up in my dream. So I incubated a request that I wanted to see my dogs. And my first dream was disturbing because somebody was trying to come up the stairs and kill my dogs. And I started flailing around. Julie woke me up, and I could have actually hurt my dogs, and that kind of made me mad. But then the next one, I took Sadie, my little Yorkie poo, for a walk. And when I got back inside my dreamscape, I discovered that she was an imposter, that she was not really my dog. So I woke up disturbed from that. It took me 3 attempts to actually have a dream where I took my dogs for a walk. They were in my dreams, and they were who I know them to be in my waking conscious state. And in my dream, I got a knock on the door, and I go over to the door, and there's 3 men in suits that hand me a piece of paper and tell me I need to sign it and give it back to them. And what it said was a dream satisfaction affidavit. And I signed it and handed it back. They looked at each other and looked up at me and vanished. So there's a lot of really cool things that you can do in your dream work. Now, I haven't consciously been able to project out a body yet, but I'm confident that that can be done, because Whitley Strieber describes that he's done it on several occasions. And on one occasion, someone we all know and love, Linda Moulton Howe, actually saw him when he was out of his body. So there's work that can be done in these areas where, once you realize that we're living in an observer-dependent matrix interface, that this isn't objective reality like we thought it was, you can connect with your dreamscape. And now every night, instead of just thinking I'm going to be unconscious for 8 hours or however long I sleep, it's actually an extension of my waking life, because I'm looking forward to waking up inside my dreamscape and seeing my body and being pretty much like I am right now. So when you're working every day, I'm recently retired. I retired 2 years ago. I still go in 1 day a week just for some extra money. But 42 years where you're just working every day, going to work whether you feel like it or not, and coming home, you're tired, and you go to bed. You don't have time for any of this. And this is one of the reasons that I'm an advocate for what Andrew Yang is proposing for the first time, is some form of universal basic income, because there are people out there that are forced into jobs that they hate, and then they have kids, and they have to support their families through that their whole entire life, when they might be creative geniuses in some other avenue that would benefit all of us. It would benefit the entire society to find a good fit for what they really want to love and what they really want to do. And this concept of universal basic income, where if you choose to, you can live very, very simply on this and explore what your real interests are. And I think in the long run, I know it sounds like a strange idea, and people are worried about socialism, at least half the country is, and they will eventually come on board, I think, when they feel enough pain from automation. Right now, not enough people are feeling the pain from that, where a robot is taking their job. Right now, it's limited to people that work at McDonald's. They're replacing them with the kiosk, and at Walmart, they've got the self-checkout. Well, people think their jobs are safe right now, but they're really not. I mean, they've got robotic versions of surgeons and doctors and occupational therapists, what I've done for all my life, or for 20 years anyway, 22 years. So all of these jobs that we currently do are going to be replaced.
Yeah, I think we should celebrate automation, because that's what it's a reverse think. Be afraid of it. No, because that'll free us to do things that are creative and use our intelligence, and don't make us do manual labor that's repetitive and that can be automated and robotized. We don't need to be robots and corporate economic slaves. So if you really go into looking at the future and come out of this present mindset, which is it's like a box. It's like the Matrix, and you look at it from outside. See, what I'm doing at night, a lot of times is I'm going to these classes. Whitley Strieber spoke about the secret school. Well, I find myself on other planets, and I'm attending classes. Sometimes I'm teaching them. I'm studying other systems, how other planets do their governance or rulerships. And this is our planet. They're looking at it like it's so primitive and antiquated and ineffective. And so they're teaching the other systems. So keep going, Russell. You're getting it. But what we are is multidimensional beings that are simultaneously existing on many levels, many planets. We're not just Russell, we're not just Janet, we're not just Sasha. We can have other forms that are, humanoid or reptilian or nothing that we've ever imagined or envisioned. And so once you can get out of this mindset, like you're saying, that we're just limited to this world, and start making your dreams lucid and start getting used to interacting with interdimensionals and extraterrestrials, you'll start accessing these different layers of yourself. And Whitley Strieber is a pioneer in this. I read his secret school and how he learned how to get comfortable interacting with extraterrestrials, because what stifles us is ourselves. We become fearful that this isn't normal, that we might be crazy when you start using all these criticisms and judgments. But that's what our world is about. It's about keeping us in the matrix, keeping us from discovering who we truly are, because we truly are, we'll stop having wars, we'll stop feeding this current system that keeps us enslaved. And you just summarized it. There's a poor man, you work every day of your life for 40, 50 years in a job you really don't like, and you end your life, and it's like you haven't really lived. You haven't enjoyed it yourself. You haven't written a poem or sung a song or painted a painting. And you have that, like, I'm going to get to that someday, but you never can get to it. But at the end of the road, you're just too exhausted to do what you really wanted to do. So someone else. Sasha.
Well, it just seems that it's interesting to balance innovation with social services. And so if Bezos rips off everybody, you just do value added, and the people that you've freed from having to do some menial job because it's not going to be done by robots can retrain people. People shouldn't, and so that's it. What do you do about the poor gun manufacturers and bomb makers if you put them out of business? You just another thing that they train them for it and pay them at the same level. It's balance.
Great.
Well, what's interesting is there's a debate right now among quantum physicists versus the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics versus the many worlds, what's called Everettian many worlds interpretation. Now, Dr. Sean Carroll is one of the people that's an advocate for the many worlds version. He says it's the simplest way for the Schrodinger equation to unfold naturally without bringing in hidden variables and all kinds of nasty math. And what that means is that everything that we think actually spawns a parallel world. And what all of the Copenhagen people think that, like you've heard of the Schrodinger's cat experiment, where they have the cat with the gas that's released. When you check it, it's either alive or dead. And, if it's alive, then you just think that is the reality, the only reality that's solidified. Well, what Dr. Sean Carroll is saying is the cat is both alive and dead, that actually, when you open the box, whatever world you see, whether the cat's alive or dead, an alternative world branched off from that, and that this is the natural evolution of the Schrodinger equation, the wave function equation. There's one wave function for the universe, and the way that it unfolds is that it creates all these number of parallel worlds and parallel timelines, exactly what you said, Janet. So isn't it interesting that what you just said is being confirmed by modern scientists? They're completely changing the paradigm, where they're merging Newtonian physics with quantum physics and merging what we know of science with even theology and metaphysics, and postulating the existence of the one infinite conscious agent, at the top of the whole heap. Hoffman touches on that. And another thing that Hoffman touches on is that when we create an AI that has the appropriate format to access this realm of an infinite number of conscious agents, he says, what are we going to open a portal to? He says, maybe some of them are not so nice. So that leads into what the friendship group called the CTRs, or the group from Orion, that's an artificial race who worship intelligence. They may be trying to, like what Whitley Strieber says, concretize themselves there. Jim Mars in Alien Agenda says somebody out there is trying to recreate their super science. So the bottom line is human beings may be a technology, sort of like a self-replicating von Neumann probe intentionally planted here for the sole purpose of creating this technological singularity, so that the other, which we are also connected to in some way we don't understand, can concretize itself into this realm. And one thing that Whitley Strieber said was one of the functions.
Wait, I've got to absorb some of this. You're going so fast. Okay, so bookmark where you are, because I've got to interject some things in here now and again. I'm getting overwhelmed with it. It's a lot of wonderful information. Okay, so I got to get back to the thought I had. So because of this is true, if this is true, and it is true, we are not the victim. We are the observer that is necessary in order for things to happen and be and become. So we're never the victim. If we don't like what's going on around us, we can consciously choose something else and replace it with something positive. So if we're having a world full of war, go back to your level of responsibility. I'm creating it. And if you do it individually, the more you become conscious aware of your lucidity of your existence and your dreams, you actually create the new world. And I think that's what the powers that be, the government, whoever it is, the Illuminati, they're fearful that we will realize that we are making this all up. And if we don't like it, we are so powerful, we can say, stop, I went off of this train, it's disgusting. And that's how you started. It said people are bored and tired of wars, right. And they're getting their level of responsibility and they're checking out. So yes, we're creating it. If you don't like it, stop just complaining about it and do something else. Choose something good, conscious, loving, and even the small acts of kindness manifest 100-fold and will create reality for all of the continuum. Sasha.
Well, it's just basically people aren't believing the benign common narrative, which is a lie through which governments steal lives and property from other people. People don't believe that anymore. And the fascism and dictatorship is showing itself in nakedness, but it's been here in this predatory government from the get-go. As long as you have hierarchy, frozen institutions that are run by the people that have most access to property, it's not going to work for the benefit of the majority of the citizens.
Well, you said something important there, because at some point, consensus reality comes into play. In other words, the best thing that any of us can do is align our own frequency with the light, love, light of the one infinite creator source and the law of one, just like Ross says. And if enough of us do that, it will change the user interface completely. What a lot of the physicists are giving the example is, let's say we're playing a volleyball game and we all know we're in virtual reality and we're bouncing the ball back and forth, and one of us has to go use the restroom. So he takes off his headset. Well, what the other players in the virtual reality realm see is his icon just shrivel up and fall to the dirt. And then when he comes back and puts his headset on, and for all practical purposes, in this user interface, he's dead. And then when he comes back from the restroom, he puts his headset back on, he pops to life in in another avatar. Maybe he can switch avatars. He's reincarnated into the virtual reality interface, and they continue the game. So I want to read you something from 1971. It's 3 sentences, okay? It's Jane Roberts, and she's channeling Seth, and he is saying through her the exact same thing that people like Dr. Sean Carroll, who ascribe to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. It says, it seems to you that reality is composed of those actions that you choose to take. Those that you choose to deny are ignored. The road not taken then seems to be a non-act, yet every thought actualized and every possibility explored. Physical reality is constructed from what seems to be a series of physical acts. Since this is the usual criterion of reality for you, then non-physical acts usually escape your notice, discretion, or judgment. And that's exactly what Dr. Sean Carroll, Dr. Carlo Rovelli, Brian Greene, all the string theorists, that's exactly what they're saying, that there's an infinite number of parallel worlds and parallel timelines, and that outside this virtual reality user interface, the past, the present, and the future of the virtual interface is equally real. And the only reason that we see the past as a little bit more real than the future is because we're more familiar with it. And one of the things that Dr. Carlo Rovelli points out is that our present moment that we experience, which the material reductionists, they've said that the only thing that's objectively real is this present moment. Well, it's a fleeting moment, because what I said just now is gone forever, according to this paradigm. And in the new paradigm, the past, the present, and the future are all happening in the eternal now, outside of time and space, and they're all interacting with one another. And that's where Dr. Helmut Schmidt's retroactive causality comes into place. There's somebody I watched on Gaia the other day. It's a female, and she's a PhD in some field, I forget, but she's actually doing work contacting her higher self and what we would consider the distant future, and asking to heal certain physical conditions that she has right now, or gaining help philosophically from that aspect of herself that I met in August of 2009. I met an aspect of myself that's way beyond what I am right now, in what I would call the distant future. The raw material says all of us have a higher self and a sixth density in what we would call the distant future. And what they're doing there correlates with what Greg Braden is saying on the Gaia show, that we're living in a far distant future where we're trying to get into a realm where we need the lessons that we're learning right here in this moment in space-time. So when we learn our lessons here, our higher self is actually able to go to another level within the multiverse that it wants to enter into. But we have to learn our lessons here first. So it's an amazing reality, a picture of reality that's very different. There's a really good podcast right now where Michael Shermer, who's one of the high priests of scientism or material reduction, is debating Donald Hoffman on an 1.5 hour long podcast. And I think Donald Hoffman made Michael Shermer's rear end pucker a couple of times, and really made him question whether he was right about what he's believed all of his life. And of course, we all know Michael Shermer grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home, and then at some point he ditched it all for material science. So there's some really good arguments played out there with two super intelligent people they don't argue one time. They display mutual respect for one another, and they ping pong ideas, let the other one finish. They don't interrupt. They don't get emotionally involved. It's a really good podcast.
Can you send that link to us so we can put that on the show page that we create for this show today? And anything else you think of, I'll add these later. So on aquarianradio.com, we'll put the show page for Russell's show with us today, and the links to these various things he's mentioning, and maybe some of the books, and what else? A link for this show once we get it uploaded after production, in post-production. Okay. So you were talking about that we have moved past Newtonian physics to a new physics.
Right.
And so perhaps we've learned all we can from that concept, and as a group we have co-created the new physics, which are bubbling out in certain individuals, but it's really for the collective.
We're co-creating the creator too.
And we're co-creating everything.
Right. I like what Ray Kurzweil said one time. Somebody asked him if he believed in God, and he says, not yet. Yeah, but all these people are really interesting. Dr. Carlo Rovelli is an Italian physicist, and he's written 2 books, Reality is Not What It Seems and The Order of Time. And both of them are very enlightening and very mind-blowing, that time just isn't anything like we think it is. And that some of these stories, I'm really glad that I've adopted a frame of mind where, like John Keel says, belief is the enemy. Because anytime you get trapped in a dogma, you're going to miss new truths when they come your way, because you're filtering everything that you're seeing and hearing through this dogma. And right now we've got this religion called scientism, and they're filtering all information through their material reductionist consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain. Well, they've got a really challenge ahead of them, and it's called the hard problem of consciousness. And even though what that means is that even though we can isolate certain parts of the brain, where like if you put a magnet on a part of the brain, half of somebody's visual field goes out and all that, no one can explain, as Hoffman states, the taste of vanilla or the taste of chocolate. There's no place in the brain where they can isolate that's responsible for these tastes or these qualia, what they're referring to it as. So the hard problem of consciousness is deep, because none of the material reductionists have a clue. Nobody has a clue how consciousness can emerge from matter. That's just a non-explainable thing. So you've got people like Deepak Chopra, who comes along and says consciousness is fundamental. Alex Vikolov says the same thing in the Singularity hypothesis in digital theology, and so did Jacques Vallée. He had it right, that outside space and time lays a metaphysical structure of informational structures. He was really on the cutting edge. And the fact that somebody as smart as Dr. Jacques Vallée was one of the world's premier ufologists is really satisfying to me, because a lot of people that I know all my life that are in this scientism, material reductionist, objective reality of space and time paradigm just poo-poo ufology. They won't even talk about it. They haven't even cracked the first book on it. And ufology is going to merge with cutting-edge quantum physics, because everything we're learning in the realm of quantum physics bears witness to the documented cases of UFO sightings and the effects that they've done, like missing time. You know, if you get near a gravitational field, you're going to have time anomalies, because time and gravity are interconnected with one another. And Seth actually had something to say about the flying saucers that I would like to share with you. It's pretty neat if you want to hear it.
Yes.
Okay, in 1970, Seth, speaking through Jane Roberts, explains some of the flying saucers. He says, "For you do not have a vehicle such as the one you think you perceive. I'm speaking of only certain cases where you have visitors from other realities. What happens is that you have an attempt to exchange camouflage realities. The beings entering your plane cannot appear within it as themselves. Since their atomic structure is not the same as yours, distortions must occur to make any contact possible. Thus, you are greeted with a certain set of sense data. Then you try to figure out what is happening. The sense data you see means that the event is already distorted to some degree. The physical vehicles that are often perceived are your interpretation of the event that is actually occurring." Now, this is coming through somebody back in 1970, and I've seen interviews with Jane Roberts, and this sophistication of material could not possibly have come from her mind. It's not a case where she sat down and fabricated this wonderful book. Whether you want to think it comes from another unknowable aspect of her own subconscious, or if there's actually an outside agency that called themselves Seth that was speaking through her, using her body, their mind complex as an instrument, is up to everybody's judgment. But it's a fantastic body of material. And if I had not had a near-death experience, I wouldn't even recognize it as true. I would have just seen it as gobbledygook. But having been first...
it would have to be both. It would have to be both a figment of her mind and an outside agency, both and neither, by the formulation that you're going with.
Yeah, so right. We have to look at the whole phenomenon of channeling, and what is a person in a body? Can a body have more than one soul? Can a soul have more than one body? Can the body get possession? There's all these phenomena related to channeling. Can you consciously
what is self and what is other?
What is self? What is other? Can you consciously put aside your own mind and let someone else talk through you? Do you have to go unconscious and then leave your body for someone to talk through you? Can you be there when they're talking through you, like a medium, and then some of them go unconscious, I don't remember anything, and some remember it all? Can you have a walk-in? Can you have somebody who's alive and they have an experience and they leave and then some other soul comes in? What do you guys think of that, of all those things? What's going on here? We have to look at the whole concept of what is a soul and what is a person, and what do you guys think?
I think different people symbol different ways, and whatever set of integers they use, it works. And I'd say embrace it all, because we're, all embracing the elephant of reality, and the more views we have. Maybe that's my way of, as a psychotherapist, is people have their own internal logic, and if you just let them go and don't make them wrong, they come up with incredible, wonderful models.
Well, what I would add to that is if outside space and time, there's all these conscious agents of various levels of evolution that are certainly capable of speaking through us, I would imagine. There seems to be two fundamental forces out there in the higher dimensions. One is what the raw material calls service to self, and this would be the ego, the dominance over. Their goal is conquest, manipulation, deception, all kinds of things. And then you've got the service to others, which would be the angelic forces, the benevolence, the egalitarianism. It's non-hierarchical, it's fair, it's truthful. And just with those two fundamental premises, we can all hopefully see, what's leading our country right now. And I'm not speaking of any particular party. They exist in both parties. But there are people who are definitely involved in politics and gaining power over the masses to take the world in the direction they want to go, which ultimately is a service to self type of endeavor for them. I mean, they care about it for ego and money and power. And what I, for one, would like to see is a leader come on board if, in fact, the human mind is even adequate for the big data era that we're in now, and I have my doubts about that. But if a human agency is to rule the country or rule the world, I sure would like for them to be one of these service to other entities that cares about the benefit of the whole instead of, what they can get out of it, and they're willing to lie and gaslight and do whatever they can to promote themselves. So there's a lot of issues on the table, but all throughout history, we've got, the angels and the demons. We've got the shaitan, jinn, and the angels of Islamic literature. William Bromley wrote a book called The Gods of Eden. He talks about the custodial ET race, the negative one, and the maverick race, the positive one. And then John Keel comes on board and talks about the alpha group and the omega group. Somebody out there loathes us. So if, in fact, it's true, which it seems to be, that a human mind can channel information kind of probably dumbed down for our benefit. Anything coming through a human has got to be really dumbed down for where they're coming from. But there's positive and negative entities out there. And the interesting thing that the raw material brings up is that all the thou shalt not religions were from the Orion group, because what their goal is in conquesting the human psyche for their own negative, higher density existence is deception, to trick positively oriented people who are extremely positively oriented, and enforce these control religions on us to where instead of actually evolving and growing spiritually, people are just blindly obeying these thou shalt nots, and they wind up aping evolution. They ape spirituality. It's not really a true spirituality where, you've got all the time in the world and you can evolve at your own pace. It's kind of a forced straitjacket that's put on. And what that lends to is hierarchies and priesthoods where everybody's subservient to them. They got to pay them homage. They're almost like demigods, where they're worshipped as a middleman between a conscious human entity and the universal creator source. So there's a lot going on in the higher dimensional realms, and not all of it's good. But the nicest thing is, according to the raw material anyway, there's more positively oriented service to others' planets in the Milky Way galaxy than there are negative. It actually takes quite a bit of work to be as evil as you have to be to graduate into fourth, fifth, or sixth density negative dimensions. It's a lot easier, actually, to be a person of light or a service to others person, because you only have to be around 50% according to the material. I mean, nobody's perfect, but at least as long as your main thrust of your heart intention is to be good and kind to other people, I think you're going to be okay.
Right, and they get invested in a certain reality, a certain concept, be it religion or a political party or a theology or whatever it is. They get so invested in that they have to do everything to eliminate the other perspective or absorb and make them all the same and have them in a hierarchy so they can control and manipulate. I think that's what's going on right now.
Consonance and dissonance.
And consonance and dissonance is that, we're having the polarity in terms of politics playing out right now. But, we've had many polarities play out, religions and, countries and everything that John Lennon talked about. Imagine having no countries, no politics, no religion. But when we have any of those things, we polarize and become self and apparent other, and we get into this conflict, and we do anything imaginable to maintain our reality structure, including kill each other, kill the planet. It doesn't matter. What matters is the belief, the system, and not the individuals or how we evolve as a species. They don't want us to become conscious and enlightened and remember our oneness and universal consciousness. So we have about 4 minutes, and we're going to be at the top of the hour. What would you like to say, Dr. Lessin? Add your
where to start with, within and without. Just start with what parts of yourself are alienated, and what is it in others that is bugging you, and is there a part of you that's doing the same thing to yourself as you see the disrespect for consciousness outside of you? Are you disrespecting your own consciousness? And that's what allows you to have empathy with everything and everybody, and to feel the vibrations at the different levels of consciousness, but not be trapped at any given level. That's what I think.
Right, because the dogmatic religions have a terrible history of war and conflict and bloodshed. So there's something distorted from the true intention of the original messenger, whoever that may be. When it's in human ears and human minds, it becomes distorted, and you get into this frame of mind, this fundamentalist frame of mind, where it's like only we have the truth, and we're doing God a favor by killing all the people of the untruth. And it seems like every religion that's evolved on this planet so far has been of that mindset. And we need to change that.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting from my discipline, anthropology, is that in many societies that don't have high technological interest, they reach the same kind of conclusions of a universe, an interactive universe where everything is inchoate and forming in every direction as divine play or Leela. It's this hierarchy of holarchy of hierarchies, which comprehends them all. And it doesn't matter whether you've got books or whether you're just doing ipoca up your nostrils. People get to the same space. And even within the dogmatic religions, there's usually meditative people that break free of the dogma.
Well, if you want to look at the other side of it, there's a part of it that's invested in the game. And even if we're saying we're tired of the game, we're invested in the game, because what else would we do once the Matrix is over? Once the game is over, is there another game that will come in, another whole system, operating system for existence? So we're all enlisted in maintaining this reality, no matter how disgusted we are by it, because we don't know what else is coming. But maybe we'll be brave enough to let it go. What do you think? Got 1 minute.
Well, according to the raw material, there's 8 densities within the octave of reality we're in. Some of the individuals have made it to the 7th level. The 8th density is the first step of the next octave, and even 7th density, very high beings don't have a clue what that is.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix. I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin. This is Revolution Radio Studios B. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as the Mad Painter, and our special guest is Russell Brinegar. But before we get back to our show, I'd like you to go over to the donation button. It's not a button, it's a donation link, tab. It's called tab on revolution.radio. It's up on the top on the far left. You click that, it takes you to where you can make payment to revolution.radio. And you can take, you can put in your credit card number and you can determine your amount. There we go. Brand new, just a couple days ago. Okay, before we bring back Russell, what would you like to say, Sasha?
Okay, well, Russell, you brought up a really interesting process. We call it the Dream Maker process. That now that you have, and I guess all of us can answer that, if we are our dream makers, what do we want to ask of our of those other realities that we contact? What would each of us like to learn? And if we were going to now give ourselves a post-hypnotic suggestion for our next journey into conscious dream making, what would we like to tell ourselves?
Well, what I would like to do is contact the higher self that I met during my near-death experience in 2009 and ask it what it needs in order to achieve its goals. And I know I'm here to overcome certain things and learn lessons to help that aspect of my psyche out. And I just want to spend the rest of my years learning and changing what behaviors and distortions that are taking me away from universal love and fix it and join the social memory complexes in the 4th, 5th, 6th dimensions or densities that have chosen this path, this positive path. I can think of nothing more pleasant than to have a more macro view of what's going on outside of our space-time complex with a group of like-minded individuals that were super benevolent and super knowledgeable. And that's my personal goal anyway, is I want to get away from the negativity and the duality and polarize myself to where, I can associate with people that are more pleasant to associate with than the beings that you find here in this realm who seem to be just obsessed with destruction.
Wow. Thank you.
I'd like to read something from 1972 concerning our dreamscape, if you don't mind, from the Nature of Personal Reality.
Sounds great. Go ahead.
It has to do with what we're talking about. And this is about 3 sentences. It comes from this entity that she channeled called Seth. And it says, quote, "Space itself accelerates in ways that you do not understand. You are not tuned into those frequencies. Any point in space is also a point in what you think of as time, a doorway that you have not learned to open. Your physical brain is a doorway that triggers activity in your mind. Your beliefs are largely responsible for the areas of the brain that you activate for the resulting non-physical action of the mind. Were it not for dream activity, you would be, relatively speaking, enclosed within it, afraid to try out new concepts and intuitive realizations in the face of what seems to be a rock bed reality." And I found that pretty useful, to open the door to the dreamscape and start interacting with your dreamscape self and see that as part of you. Don't see it as an imaginary part of you, or your brain processing garbage, or however I used to look at it, is that this is me in a different realm interacting with conscious agents in another dimension, like in a parallel world. And I found something really fascinating. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Bruce Goldberg, but he not only does past life regressions, he does future life progressions. And what he has found, just like Dr. Michael Newton hypnotized people to in between lifetimes, and they found really common narratives, like you were saying, Janet, about the life review. You have all the time in the universe to do a life review, which is kind of scary. But he does future life regressions, and he's found that cross-culturally, some of the things that they predict about the future match one another. One of the things being that in from 3,000 to 5,000 years from now, we will master time travel, and that some of the UFOs in our skies that people are interacting with are actually time travelers from our future. If they're in a craft, they're in the range of 3,000 years into the future, and if they're like angelic light beings, they're from 5,000. He goes, what's interesting is that all of his future progressions stop at around 5,000 years from now. So he says, I don't know if we just ascend from this realm completely or what's going on there, but they seem to stop at 5,000 years from now. But one of the pieces of trivia that he brought up was the introduction to the Twilight Zone. Remember that by Rod Serling?
Yeah.
Okay, it's exactly what the quantum physicists are saying. I want to go out, take it sentence by sentence. It says, you unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, and a dimension of mind. And if you think about it, dream space is the place you go when you die, and it enables the spirit to enter non-physical realms through the imaginations of the mind. And in dream space, without the body, you're still able to see and hear. And then the intro goes farther. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. This is the concept of superposition, where you exist in an aspect of the probability field and a physical existence at the same time. So that whole introduction, you unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone, is cutting-edge quantum physics.
Wow.
I just find that really weird.
That's great. I love the Twilight Zone. I was very young kid watching that. I really had to come in and my mother called me. Call me in. I think it was 7 o'clock. Twilight Zone is on.
Well, another thing that Seth predicted or turned Jane Roberts onto was something called ghost chemicals. And he says this is something that we haven't discovered yet. And there's actually chemicals that we ingest in our body that gets turned into electromagnetic radiation and exudes into the higher aspects of our aura and even into the atmosphere, and can affect the very atmosphere. It's like our internal organs and everything exist inside our body, while our physical being exists inside the body of Gaia, inside Earth, which is also a conscious agent. So the things that we ingest and the chemicals in our bodies that get transmitted into electromagnetic radiation and exuding it into the atmosphere have an effect on everything. And this is a 2-sentence quote, if you bear with me. It says, as your body is in a state of constant flux and chemical interaction, so is the atmosphere, which reflects on another level of all the psychic, chemical, and electromagnetic properties that exist within the body. There is little difference between the currents of blood that flows through your veins and the wind current, except that one seems to be within you and the other without. That is really profound in the interconnectedness of all things, that we see these icons on our desktop, be it a tree or a dog or a snake or a field of grass. These are like icons on our desktop. And we don't really see, as Hoffman states, we don't see reality the way it really is. In fact, the way evolution has operated is it blocks out huge aspects of reality from our perception so that we can survive and pass on our genes to another generation. So we're seeing a very dumbed down version of what's actually there. And I'm glad they're finally figuring it out. There's another physicist, James Gates, who said that in mathematics that describe the physical universe, you find ones and numbers, computer code, and not only is it code, it's a specific type of computer code that was discovered in the 1940s by a guy named Claude Shannon. So we're getting it together piecemeal by piecemeal with the fine-tuning aspect that there's all these parameters that had to be set within such precision and hold for billions of years that it had to be an intentional act of creation. And the fact that there's computer code in the matrix, and now we're finding out that space and time itself are not objective reality, that objective reality lies beyond space and time. It's a real exciting time for science. And I've got friends on both sides of the fence, the people that have adopted the new paradigm that's material reductionism or Newtonian physics with quantum physics, and come up with sort of a metaphysical virtual reality way of looking at what our perceptions are. And then there's people that are locked in the old paradigm. And who knows, maybe the new paradigm will be falsified. We'll go back to the old paradigm. But it is quite exciting that there's a brand new way of looking at reality that we're on the precipice of.
Your turn, Sasha.
Well, for me, the dilemma is that if there's a whole which is interactive and continually evolving, and yet, there are parts that you consider to be, and I consider to be suffering, that seems to me to be a spurious dichotomy of a system that has to be exactly as it is because of the systematic operation of any system. At least that seems to be a dilemma for me.
Okay, it has been for me, but I've recently, I'm trying to grapple with this concept that I'll explain real quick. We live in a world where we seem to perceive quite a bit of what we would call evil in the world. And if the Big Bang Theory is correct, it started out 13.7 billion years ago as a singularity, which means it was one thing. It was one thing. And what it's going through in the arrow of time is from low entropy, the singularity, to eventually high entropy and heat death. But in the middle of it is all these fractalized complex components. It's almost like, well, Brian Greene says that the universe is like a cup of coffee. It's just one thing. And it's like if you sample the bottom of the cup, it's the same as sampling from the top of the cup. But if you pour cream into the coffee, before it becomes completely homogenized, you're going to have all these fractalized parts. If you put them under electron microscope, you'll see crystalline structures and little communities of molecules and everything. But eventually it all spreads out into what they project the end of the universe will be like, which is like heat death. Right now, there's 20,000 stars per second that are disappearing from our view. We will never see these stars because of the expansion of the universe. So going from low entropy to high entropy, all this weird stuff can happen. We're sort of in an intermediate phase where it seems like there's so much distortion and polarity, what we call good and evil. It has something to do, the ultimate purpose of the universe has something to do with what humans would call good versus evil. There's like a higher dimensional cosmic conflict of this somehow, some way. I don't have all the details to it. But if we're going from low entropy to high entropy, according to the arrow of time and the second law of thermodynamics, for every photon that we get from the sun, we radiate 20 photons. I mean, it's a heat exchange and an increase in entropy as time goes on. We're just in that, in the life that we're living right now in third density or whatever you want to call it, there is this polarity that we observe. And my sense is that the reason we're here is to sort of make a choice. And then the higher dimensions or densities after third density, it becomes more segregated, where the people that want to pursue service to self and become negatively oriented in fourth, fifth, sixth density, they can go that direction. And there are those populations in the universe, which is kind of frightening. But the good news is, according to the law of one, there's more of the positively oriented higher dimensions, fourth, fifth, and sixth, trying to get into the seventh or whatever, the portal of the cosmic supermind, and they're using our physical lives, to learn the lessons we need to achieve their goals. The concept that there is no evil is a really hard concept to wrap your mind around. That if eventually what we're calling good and evil is going to be reconciled somehow in what we call the distant future and unified, that's a really hard thing to grapple with. So I empathize with you, Dr. Lessin, on that one. That's something that I think about a lot.
So you're saying there's no evil?
Well, I'm not saying that. It's the material that I'm running into. This channeled material, and it matches physics. That in the beginning, at the Big Bang, it was a singularity. There was no good, no bad, no nothing. It was just like some people want to look at it like pure light, pure love, whatever you want to call it, whatever the singularity entails. Okay, it was unified. It was just one single thing. And then when it explodes and goes along the arrow of time, trillions of years or whatever, and this heat death exchange, this increasing entropy, you're going from low entropy to high entropy over trillions of years, that all these polarities split off. And one of the channeled works that I like is the Urantia book, which, according to the Law of One, was written by Earth entities in the lower Earth planes. Humans that were deceased wrote the Urantia book, according to the Law of One, which I find kind of fascinating. But it has a very good explanation of evil in there, and it eases my mind a little bit about it. But, I see the horrendous meat industry, and then putting chickens in cages, and like in China, they're skinning dogs alive because they think it makes the meat taste good, and wars and people getting their insides spilled out on the battlefield. I see things that I want to gravitate away from, and my life beyond this physical life. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And I want to polarize myself to where I don't have to deal with that. And I'm working hard on it. But it's just part of it. It's part of reality that when the singularity dissolves into what we call the universe, that these polarities emerge. What the physicists are saying is that underneath physical reality is a sea of quantum events in which time is meaningless, and that space and time emerge out of that. And that we've even got a dumbed down version of it, because it's just the way evolution drives us is for what Hoffman calls fitness benefits or something, where it just serves our immediate purposes. And in all the game theory models that they've done on the computer, where they plug in all the parameters of their virtual universe and they set these little creatures about to evolving, the ones that see reality for the way it really is, they see the components of the computer and everything, they go extinct. So the ones that actually survive, according to game theory, are the ones that are perceiving a very, very dumbed down version of reality that just meets their immediate needs. It's almost like if you're playing Grand Theft Auto, you would become distracted by all the people you're killing and all the banks you're robbing and everything like that. You wouldn't win the game if you were confused with the bigger level of what's going on, within the computer circuitry and all the flip-flop circuits and everything, moving electrons around. You'd get shot and you'd lose. So it seems that the perceptions of each species-specific interface is just evolving in that being to where it just meets their immediate needs for survival and passing on their genes.
Right.
But going back to your dilemma, Dr. Lessin, yeah, I grapple with that a lot. This observation on my part that what I would call extreme evil, that I even have to deal with it. I have to look at it. I have to absorb it psychologically. I don't really care for it, and I want to get away from that into a more positively polarized evolution.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, I just use the resonance of disrespect for consciousness, which is what we existentialists mean evil as opposed to ignorance. Evil is the disrespect for consciousness and the events that you need to support consciousness. That's what we mean, at least in kind of existentialism I practice, by evil. And so where I can start with, how am I disrespecting parts of my own consciousness Have I overdeveloped my pride and underdeveloped my humility, or whatever it is? So are there parts of me that I'm being evil toward, disregarding their needs? And so, whether it affects the world or not, I don't know. But it works, and it gives me something to do that makes me feel happy about life.
Yeah, and according to the latest thinking on that in the physics realms, our thoughts actually evolve into an actual reality, that there's all these branching universes going off from the one that we perceive. Now, here's a mystery to me. Dr. Sean Carroll is just staunch atheist. Okay, but at the same time, he will say that we live in a multiverse where there's an infinite number of copies of himself, but yet he thinks when he dies, he's dead. And that doesn't compute in my mind, because if there's an infinite number of yous out there and one of you dies, it seems like he would at least think that the locus of his awareness would shift from this timeline to the next, or go to one of these other versions of him until he lives them all. But I think that's somebody possibly that has their foot in two different worlds, that they're in the new paradigm and the old paradigm at the same time. So I find him interesting. But he's got two books. What's that?
When there's a vociferous denial, it's probably true. The person wouldn't put that much energy into denying it.
Yeah, it would be interesting for the people that just put a lot of vested interest in the idea that when you die, you're simply unconscious forever. If they go through 100,000 years of unconscious purgatory or something, before they wake up into some other reality. I mean, it's really unknown and really exciting. I mean, it's enough for me that the scientists, because when I first started getting into ufology and ghosts and cryptids and paranormal phenomena, I mean, I was laughed at, by my old friends. They think, oh yeah, you had a heart attack, you lost your mind. Even my cardiologist, I told him I had some skin issues and various things. He goes, well, that's lucky. That's all you've got. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, my heart attack patients, they're just crazy. And I think he was one of these people that's of the material reductionist paradigm, where what he's viewing is these people have gone insane, is that they've actually been turned on to a multi-dimensional existence, and their interest has shifted into these other realms that he considers woo. And, from his perspective, they've just lost their minds. I just thought that was a funny moment at the cardiologist when I was having my checkup one time. But yeah, there's a lot of friends. I wrote a book back in 2000, which was challenging my fundamentalist Christian upbringing, called Outgrowing the Bible, The Journey from Fundamentalism to Free Thinking. It's still on Amazon from 20 years ago. And now there's people like Paul Wallace and I can't think of the other ones right off the hand, but there's a lot of them that are saying exactly what I was saying 20 years ago. And it was before I was aware of people like Zecharia Sitchin or ufology or the Anunnaki or anything like that. But I made reference in my book in the year 2000 to the fact that a lot of the Old Testament stories could be traced to Sumerian cuneiform. So I find that significant, that even 20 years ago, I was sort of onto the trail, but the near-death experience in 2009 really popped the cork. And like you said, it broke my cosmic egg, or however you want to put it. But, it really got me into being open-minded to a lot of things that previous to 2009 I wouldn't have even considered. For example, there's an abductee named Jim Maroney who was taken car and all back in 1986 on board an alien spacecraft and interacted with extraterrestrial beings for quite some time, what he perceived as, a 24-hour period or whatever, and then placed back into the parking lot of the truck stop where he's abducted from. And the first thing he did is he went in and talked to a waitress and asked her if she noticed anything outside, a flash of light, or, did you notice anything? And she said, no, everything's fine. So I think in these little pulsations in and out of the quantum field that we're experiencing right now, where we go in and out of superposition, in that interim period, an extraterrestrial civilization, a post-singularity civilization, has the correct technology to do this. They can extract somebody physically into one of these nanosecond long pulsations and have a whole big interaction with them and put them right back where they started from. So that would be one of those things in the category that prior to the near-death experience, I would have said, oh, there's no way, you've been, reading too much bunk. But I believe Jim Moroney, and I believe a lot of the abductees and the reports, they're telling the truth as they understand it. Some of them are awakening to memories that they have of other lives and other dimensions and other forms other than human. And, they've been, a multitude of them have been looked at by body language experts, and some have passed lie detector tests. Some of them I've met in person. I've had the pleasure of meeting them in person. And I believe them. I believe that what they're reporting is the truth as they understand it. Now, how we want to work in the dynamics and the mechanics of what they're saying is a whole nother thing. But through the Seth material, the raw material, the Urantia book, and what the quantum physicists are saying, there is a way. There is a portal into these other realms in which time is meaningless, and you can have an expanded perception, just like your perception of your regular life that extends for a period of time and then be placed right back in the next nanosecond in the life that you're living here. So I think that's possible.
What's the main difference between what you believed before you had your near-death experience and what you believed after?
You'd refer to it as material reductionism, what Michael Shermer believes. I'll put it to you that way. He's the editor, I think, of Skeptic magazine. He's got the podcast where he interviewed Donald Hoffman, and boy, did Donald Hoffman give him a run for his money. I think he actually won the debate, if truth be known. But, scientism, Rupert Sheldrake goes into a lot of this. He wrote a book called The Science Delusion, and he goes into how the religion of scientism actually has its high priests like Richard Dawkins and the priests that dictate the doctrine of what you have to believe to be a part of that group. And it's like when it's become a religion, because when you venture outside of that, if you start talking about an interdimensional version of Bigfoot or something like that, they're going to think you've lost your mind, because it falls outside their material reductionist paradigm where space and time represent objective reality, and we operated it with Newtonian physics. When things fall, they go 32 feet per second, and that's it. A plus B equals C. There's nothing beyond that. And when you realize that that's simply not true, what I'm finding through these quantum physicists is validation for the experience that I had in 2009 that really blew my mind, and the validation for the book that I wrote, Overlords of the Singularity. Everything in there since I published that in 2016 has been validated by cutting-edge quantum physics. So until I was 54 years old, I considered the subject of ufology beneath me, and I find out now that it was above me the whole time. It's into the realm of the amplitude-hedron geometric algebra, the higher dimensional physics, where people that understand that our space-time matrix is observer-dependent, they're probably very careful in their exposure to us. And I have a pet theory about that, that since they operate on free will, there has to be a consensus in the human population that extraterrestrials actually exist, and an acceptance of their reality for us to suddenly find ourselves in a superpopulated universe full of extraterrestrials. Because right now you've got something called the Fermi paradox. It's like you've got all these reports of interactions with non-human intelligence and alien spacecraft, but where are they? You look in a telescope and there's nothing there. Well, we haven't co-created that reality yet. And when the human consciousness evolves in the future and goes through this post-singularity phase, suddenly we will observe what we've been looking for all along. That's my take on it.
Good. Sash, your turn.
Well, in a way, people do this when they go out to the ranch at Mount Adams, or they actually interact with, UFO or lights in the sky that respond to their minds and their little flashlights.
Lasers work better.
Yeah.
Right, they're lasers, yeah.
Yeah, the CE5 is what you're making reference to.
Do you think they're calling them in, that they're bringing them down, there's
they're
telepathic?
They're interacting with something. Now, here's the thing. According to the raw material, you've got the Confederation on one hand that put a quarantine on Earth 75,000 years ago, 3 precessional cycles ago. And according to this material, there was no graduation to fourth density in the first 25,000 years. In the second 25,000 years, there was a few who could have, but they elected to stay and help their brethren achieve it into the next density, and they're what's known as the Great White Brotherhood. You've heard about that more than likely, in the literature and whatnot. Yeah. There's actually an organization, a higher density organization that has stayed behind, so to speak, and I think that's a pretty noble gesture. But what the Confederation is looking for, and the reason that they came through Carla Ruckert in 1981, according to them anyway, is that they want as many people to make it into the next density as possible, for people to come to an awareness of the unity of everything and start living their lives according to that awareness and progress rapidly. They say once you become aware that there's even a choice to be made, you can evolve yourself very quickly and very rapidly. So there's a good number of people. The ray, as they call it, has been applied to Earth for fourth density already, and we're moving into that since about 2012, I believe. But they're looking for harvestable entities. And in the meantime, you've got this Omega group, this Orion group, that are bypassing the quarantine that they set up with the cooperation of the Council of Saturn, which is a whole other subject. But the Orion group just bypasses the quarantine through these natural portals that operate sort of like a random number generator, but the people in the higher densities understand how it works so that they can come in at will. But they're actively pursuing recruits into the negative higher densities, just like the Confederation is looking for recruits through the higher positive densities. But the difference between the two is that the Confederation, so to speak, or the friendship groups, or whatever label you want to put on it, they only respond to people who voluntarily seek them according to their own free will. Whereas the negative group, the Orion group, or the CTRs, or the Wiros, is what the friendship group called it, they are forcing their will upon them. And they operate through the elites on Earth, through the military-industrial complex, through secret societies. They have a group of elites that are in touch with their very being, who are also wanting to graduate into these higher density negative realms. And they're the ones that are beneath it all, or underneath it all, some of the most negative things going on in the planet, like the weather manipulation, the wars that are being perpetrated for the sake of a few ultra-rich people on the planet. That's pretty evil, if you ask me, that you're willing to allow millions of people to die because your bank account gets bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're still in third density. We're still in the realm where we have to deal with positive and negative polarities. Hopefully, according to the literature, in fourth density, this is where the group souls begin to accumulate, and we begin to attach ourselves. One really neat thing that it says is that the second density beings, the animals, there's an infinite number of subdivisions within each density, and some of them are very close to third density. And I noticed that even between my Yorkie Poo and my Yorkie. One of them is a doggy dog, and the other one's like super intelligent, almost human. And they said that what will propel them rapidly to third density is the love of a guardian, a human guardian. A third density being that gives love to a second density creature can accelerate them into the third density, like where we're at right now. I think it's a romantic idea, if nothing else, that I apply every day. I tell my dogs I love them every single day, and if anybody's going to love a couple of dogs into third density, it's my two pups.
So one of your dogs is smarter than the other. One is a dog and one is like a higher being. What do you think caused that? Did you treat them differently, or what was it?
No, it's strictly their mind, and their consciousness is just very different. Sadie, the Yorkie Poo, is very submissive, and she doesn't watch television. She doesn't care at all what's on TV. She's she barks at a lot of stuff and everything. Whereas Mia, the Yorkie, I call her the little Einstein, because she watches television just like I do, intently, and will bark at the dogs and bark when she senses danger coming. And the really strange thing with Mia is that she can recognize herself on recognize other dogs on the television, but I've tried putting her in front of a mirror. She sees nothing. And that is just really bizarre to me. You would think that she would, if she can recognize another dog on the television screen, that she'd recognize at least another dog is in this mirror. But it's as if I put a brick in front of her face. She just doesn't see anything.
If the dog in the television is making a noise and she isn't, maybe that would explain it.
Well, that's something to think about. I didn't really consider that. She may be responding to sound, whereas when I put her up in front of the mirror, she doesn't get impact. But her little ears are going like radar all the time. And you can see the wheels turning inside her brain, inside Mia's brain. You look at Sadie, it's not as much going on in there. And you can tell that with people too, I like the way this discussion between Michael Shermer and David Hoffman was saying, is that Hoffman was saying, Shermer, when I see you, I see your face, and it establishes a portal into a vague view of what your consciousness and what your perception of reality might be like. It's a real dimmed down, and it's not as rich as the qualia that you experience on the other side of that face, And then when you get down to dogs, you can still see a portal and kind of figure out, their consciousness. Like when Mia comes up and she rolls over and wants me to rub her belly, she's experiencing anticipation. And then when I rub her belly, she's experiencing pleasure. It's real obvious that she feels pleasure. She feels pain if I pinch her when I take her harness off. But you get down to ant level, and the portal to another person's consciousness becomes very dim. And then when you look at a rock, the portal closes. I mean, if a rock is actually conscious on some level, we really don't have access to anything that a rock would experience in life. So the closer that another entity is to us, the deeper that portal becomes in understanding who they are.
Mm-hmm. My cat will roll over and give you her belly, and sometimes she'll let you rub her belly, and sometimes it's a trick, and she'll stab you with her claws. So what's that about? I never could figure that out.
Oh yeah, they have all kinds of behaviors that you could tell what you're experiencing, what you're observing is deep evolutionary history going on inside their organic brain, and they're just responding impulsively. Like yesterday, I took them for a walk, and all of a sudden they heard shots in the woods. They immediately, just like a flock of birds will immediately turn direction, they immediately shot off to the other side of the road, and they had to come up the other side of the sidewalk to come home. They were done. They were done with the walk. So they react to their environment. What's really cool is to take them camping and introduce them to deer and horses and stuff that they've never seen before, because some of the reactions are pretty fantastic. There's another thing that I've recently stumbled across, and it's a book called Egregores by Mark Stavish. It's talking about thought forms. And what this guy is saying is that anytime you've got a large group of people, like in a mega church or at a political rally or at a grassroots movement or anything like that, that this energy that this group collective is putting into the ethers creates a thought form that actually takes a life of its own, sort of like a tulpa. The Tibetan monks used to generate these tulpas by mind power alone that actually took on a life of their own and became an outside agent. And that concept is pretty interesting, that in a large gathering of people, that there might be egregores, or they also call them psychogons, where in the realms, or the more etheric realms anyway, these thought forms are produced by this group consciousness, and it actually takes a life of its own. And it's actually kind of frightening, because if you think of Hitler, Adolf Hitler and all the mass rallies he used to have, that would create this egregore that took on a life of its own. And who knows, once they establish entityhood, how long they'll last. They may last longer than the actual group lasts. So that's a whole strange subject.
Meme making.
Yeah, that's memes.
They're making memes. It's a coherent field that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's a meme.
Well, the whole idea of putting a whole thought concept into a visual. So you're creating this, what do you call it, egregore?
Egregores and psychogods. It's very similar to the concept of a tulpa. And one interesting thing that the raw material says is that some of the men in black were a thought form technology used by the Orion group, and that the Orion group can produce these thought form entities like anything from black-eyed children to Slender Man and all that. And the sole purpose is to generate fear and terror because that's what they feed on.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole concept that that's why they want to make terror in our planet, because that's their food.
Well, that actually makes sense, because how else would the men in black know to show up seconds after an actual sighting or even seconds before an actual UFO sighting to tell the people, to frighten the people and tell them not to speak a word or harm will come to them. And John Keel even chased one of them in a black Cadillac one time back in 1966, and it vanished right in front of his eyes. So he came to the conclusion that the men in black had a couple of different factions. One was a human faction from the Pentagon that got reports of these men in black encounters and wondered what that was all about, because they were angry that somebody might be impersonating officers. So there was a human group within the Pentagon that was responsible for some of the encounters, but then he's got this whole other group that seemed to be thought form entities. Now, the weirdest ones that he described were the cadavers, where they actually looked like somebody that just got dug up from a grave. And that buys into the whole idea of a thought form technology designed to generate a fright. And according to Keel, there's a whole community of what he called silent contactees, whose life is like a bad science fiction story, where they've had these encounters that frighten them and they don't understand, and they just keep it to themselves. That you'll never see them at a convention or on a radio show. They might be your next door neighbor, and they don't say a word about it because they're scared to death. He ran into a lot of people like that. And there does seem to be a huge difference in the nature and perception of the extraterrestrial encounters and abductions, because in Whitley Strieber's case that he explains in his latest book, A New World, he's struggling with this and struggling with the fear and the shock and the ontological shock that he had to deal with when he first encountered these beings like 30-some years ago. And now he's at the point where he's okay with them and he's wanting to have a symbiotic relationship with them. Well, you've got people that have dealt with it from the get-go in a much more positive fashion, like Susie Hansen, who wrote The Dual Soul Connection, where she's actually agreed before she incarnated here to allow one of the gray entities to co-host in her consciousness and experience her life vicariously. And she doesn't have any negativity associated with it at all. So it really depends on how familiar an entity is when they have first encounter, whether it's perceived as a positive, spiritually uplifting experience or a terrifying experience. I know one contactee, I don't want to mention his name, but he's terrified of the Greys and wants to kill them all. You know, he had an encounter as a young man that was very disturbing to him, and he doesn't like it at all. But then also on the alien implant that Whitley Strieber, I think it's in his left ear.
Mm-hmm. It depends on how you're raised. If you're raised in a very fundamentalist Christian culture and you're having extraterrestrial encounters, you're going to have a different experience than somebody than being raised by people that are more open-minded about things. So, you know, I was raised in a very strict religious culture, and I didn't share what was going on with me. But then I wasn't terrified about them. I don't know. I became curious, and then I started finding stuff, and I related to science fiction. So I guess it wasn't too bad because I did have the science fiction outlet, but that
allowed me to wrap my head around what was going on. I realized something was going on. They didn't have explanation. But then when Betty and Barney Hill came out with their story, then it was like I was dancing the jig. I went, all right. So what were you going to say, Sash? You have something on your mind. I could see it.
The interesting thing about Susie also is that she talks about these waves of awakenings that people have of the fractals within them. For example, of the peacemaker, the person who has come to see as missions stopping wars and things like that, and that the time is ripe now that we're entering the age of Aquarius for people that have been sleepers but have been getting visions like that their whole lives. You know, this is your time to do something. And part of the way do something in existentialism is you start by seeing if you can directly experience the world without letting your thoughts about it or your definitions of it mediate. If you can directly be one with the flow of a phenomenon that you encounter, and you understand how the self that you think you are interpenetrates with what you think you ain't. It's quite wonderful, and that's a way out of the dilemma, because there's something interesting happening, which is the present.
Correct. Yeah, the time, the progression of linear time is a mental construct. It's a perception that we have, and it's species specific. I've always thought, even before I got into the paranormal and stuff, that bees, may perceive themselves as just leisurely flapping their wings, and their perception of time in the Matrix and the VR observer-dependent interactive thing that we're in may be very different from their perspective, and they may live a long time according to their clock, whereas from ours they don't have a very long lifespan. Or hummingbirds, how in the world could you keep track of all those wing flaps? From their perspective, they're probably out for a stroll.
That's interesting. Well, we have let's see. Yeah, we have less than 10 minutes.
The best that model is in psychology. The hummingbird is the model of an aware ego, the person that can be between the opposites, and that's a really cool model for consciousness.
Yeah, there's two quotes that I always have been branded in my mind. One of them was from the late Brad Steiger. His wife and I talk on Facebook sometimes. She's really nice, but he said that the goal of what he always called the other, that the human soul was both the battleground and the goal of the other. And then you've got the Betty Andreasson abduction. That she was told that the human form is the larval form of the Greys. So there's some really interesting caterpillar to butterfly metaphors going on with that some of these higher density entities that people are coming in contact with may be some distant future, more advanced aspect of their own self, or people that they've been associated in past or future lives, or on other planets, or even in other universes. I think when our physical bodies die and we leave the playground, our icon shrivels to the ground in the casket and everybody's crying and we're still there. Some people show up at their funerals just to check it out, and see who cares about them, see who shows up. And what's interesting in the literature is some people don't even realize that they're dead right away until they go to put their hand on a lamp and their hand goes right through it. So the experiences that people have when their physical body ceases to function vary from the one that I describe in my book, Overlords of the Singularity, to others where they actually pop out of their body and they're able to see the doctors and report conversations when they resuscitate them that actually happened while they were supposedly, quote, dead. And you got Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven, he was he's still a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon. And he said there's absolutely no way this could be a product of his brain because there was absolutely no activity in his brain. Yet he went to this other realm and had some very unique experiences there. So, yes, the bottom line is space and time, as we've always been taught from childhood, is not objective reality. As it turns out, that there's a whole nother layer of metaphysical informational structures, and the physicists are slowly getting on board with that. They're not in a majority right now, but as Hoffman points out, the ones that are on board are really good ones. I mean, they're no schleps. I mean, they've got really good educations, done really good research, published a lot of peer-reviewed stuff, and they know their field, and they're saying that time and space, as we've always understood it, is doomed.
Let me ask you a question. Well, we just have a few more minutes about building a bigger, cyclotron kind of a thing, and what's that all about, and is it a good idea?
Well, I've always wondered why the cyclotron, the particle collider at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, had to be so huge. And the reason it has to be so huge is that they're accelerating these particles as close to the speed of light as possible, and then they smash them together, and their computer screens show the particles that get slung out. That's how they discovered the Higgs boson. There was a lot of skeptics that the Higgs boson even existed, but they found protons, electrons, gluons, all these virtual particles that don't even exist in real time, and they're reaching the limit of what that particle accelerator can do, and they're getting to a really small percentage, like 99% of the speed of light. And to go any faster, to smash the particles together any faster, would require a larger diameter particle accelerator. And Green and other string theorists say that it would have to be the diameter of the solar system to find an even smaller layer of particles than the ones we've already found. So we're at a standstill with this, and now they're introducing the concept of the geometric algebra, the amplitude hedron, that explains what's going on from a higher dimensional physics. And once you get into higher dimensional physics, where time no longer exists, then the mathematics becomes a lot more understandable and a lot simpler.
Got it.
Yeah. So we have 2 minutes left. What would you like to focus on?
Well, let's see. My name's Russ Brinegar. I'm on Facebook. I'm a public sort of guy, so you can send me a friend request if you want to be part of the conversations. Facebook is actually a user tool that was brand new to me anyway, about 11 years ago, and I've actually evolved to the point where I try not to put anything too controversial or negative on my wall. So no matter which political orientation you are, or philosophical orientation, or religion, you're welcome, as long as you're respectful and you don't badmouth people. And then there's a public group called Overlords of the Singularity that anybody can be a part of or join. So just send a friend request to that. So it's an open discussion. It's an evolution in progress. Nobody has all the answers. I once thought I was close to on a lot of the answers as a material reductionist, and I realized after my heart attack that I don't know squat, and I still don't know squat. And I've learned to recognize when people are way more knowledgeable and way smarter than I am, like some of these quantum physicists, and I've learned to listen to them. So, I mean, the people that are way smarter than you don't really pose any threat. They're usually pretty benign people, and they're willing to share their information.
Oh.